Can you turn on? Thanks a lot. Yeah. Oh, I'm on. Good morning, everyone. I'm sorry we're starting a little bit late. I'm Felicia Marcus, the chair of the State Water Board, and I'm calling this meeting to order on Tuesday, January 20th at 9:09 a.m. Board members with us, Vice Chair Fran Spivey Weber will be in just a few minutes, but we're going to start. To her left, to my left, is Board Member Didi Diadamo, to my right, Board Member Tam Dodak, and to her right, Board Member Stephen Moore. Mr. Howard, will you introduce the staff that's assisting today?
Yes, thank you. To my right, Chief Deputies John Bishop and Karen Turgovich. To my left, Chief Counsel Michael Laufer. And assisting the board today are Janine Townsend and Courtney Davis.
Emergency evacuation procedures in this building. For those of you who are new to us, look for the exit door nearest you, and just know when you hear an emergency sound, you need to find your stuff, find that exit door, and leave safely. We convene in Cesar Chavez Park near J and, I always get this wrong, 10th Street, if you want to hang out with us, and then you'll know when the all clear comes if you want to come back. The other thing to know is the meeting is being webcast and recorded, so it's very important, although uncomfortable, you need to speak into that microphone very close to it when you speak and adjust it, or else we may hear you up here, but the people behind you and the people watching over the web will not, and we want everybody to be able to hear what you have to say. Last thing is, please take all cell phones and either turn them off or set them to stun so that we're not disturbing everyone else. All right. Hope you all had a nice weekend. The first item of business is the public forum, and that is the time in which the board will hear from anyone who wishes to speak on an item that is not on the agenda. And we have two cards this morning. Our first speaker is Tim Stroshane from Restore the Delta. Good morning.
Good morning.
Nice to see you.
Thank you. Proceed. Is this on? Yes, okay.
You just have to pretend you're a rock star. Yeah, exactly. It's kind of weird.
Thank you, Chair Marcus. I am Tim Stroshane, Policy Analyst with Restore the Delta. Restore the Delta works in the areas of public education and outreach so that Californians recognize the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta is part of California's natural heritage and therefore worthy of restoration. We organize for a delta that is sustainably fishable, swimmable, drinkable, and farmable. We want to thank Board Chair Marcus for her recent thoughtful remarks at the PPIC Managing Drought Conference a week ago yesterday. And I also want to comment on behalf of RTD on today's CV salts item, not directly, but I want to point out that programs like CV salts are used by the board as evidence of program implementation for the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan. And we urge the board to do a thorough and proper evaluation of CV salts and the other implementation programs as part of its phase 2 development of the next Bay Delta plan. This evaluation should incorporate into its methodology the actual progress of the programs and their cost effectiveness relevant to policy goals and objectives that water quality control planning warrants. We have a couple of questions for the board during this public forum opportunity. They shouldn't take all that long to discuss. First, what is the timeline for the draft substitute environmental document on the Bay Delta plan, both phase 1 and 2? In other words, when is that document anticipated to be released? Do you folks know that yet?
Well, I'll tell you we're not sure yet because all the board members haven't been briefed and we can't all talk about it here, and it'll have to be when the staff feels comfortable. The target is somewhere in the spring,
Okay,
is what, for phase 1, and phase 2 closer to the end of the year.
thank
That's
you.
just but it's not a set, but that's kind of our thinking. It's moved before. The drought has slowed everything down, of course, because it's all the same people.
Right,
Wonderful, tired people. So.
yep.
Did I get that right? Did I get anything wrong? Somebody tell me I'm totally wrong? I think I'm right. So,
With respect to phase 2, I don't anticipate we would have the draft environmental document out by the end of the year.
okay.
We'll have
so,
the scientific basis for
Right.
the phase 2 for the alternative objectives out by the end of the year, but not the substitute
that
environmental
makes sense.
document.
That makes sense.
Thank you for that.
So things to watch for.
Yes,
2015 is going to be a big year, even if things move
Yep.
by a few months or so.
Yeah, thank you. The other question is that we would like to know how does the board know when it is and is not subject to ex parte communications with respect to people outside the board's orbit?
We asked Mr. Loffer,
Yeah,
like constantly.
The prohibition on ex parte communications only applies in the context of adjudicative proceedings. So typically, that's when an application has been filed, or in the water rights context, because there is a protest period, and often there can be years that pass between when an application is filed and a hearing may occur. It's once we know an item's going to hearing and a notice of hearing has been issued.
And that's when the bubble comes down.
And that's when the bubble comes down. And again, that's on adjudicative matters such as modifications to water rights permits and licenses. On something like the Bay Delta plan updates, those are quasi-legislative and generally not subject to a prohibition on ex parte communications.
When is it, and I know I think I know this, but just to fill out that package, when is it when we're in a phase where we actually can talk to people, but it has to be reported?
That's with respect to
legislation.
general orders, which in the water rights world we really don't have. These are
In the water quality
species
side.
of water quality permits that we don't name individual parties, but instead provide a general order that parties can enroll under. And under recent legislation from 2012, those are subject to a disclosure requirement.
Right. And so in the Bay Delta proceedings, we can talk to people until when?
Until we actually get into a
Phase
water
3?
rights proceeding.
Yeah, that would be
Correct.
phase 3 then?
Yeah.
Correct. And there will be items along the way. For example, with respect to the Bay Delta, there will be change petitions filed by the projects for, if the BDCP moves forward, and that will
Those
obviously
are water
be,
right.
once those come in and we know we're going to a hearing, that will be subject to the ex parte prohibition.
Or, yeah, if somebody petitions us on it. Right.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for asking. Next, we have Patrick Higgins from the Eel River Recovery Project.
Good morning, Felicia, members of the board. Thanks very much. I am
Thank
Patrick
you.
Higgins, Eel River Recovery Project Volunteer Coordinator. And this morning, my report to you is twofold. First, on the anniversary of 004-2014, your resolution to try to get grassroots work going in the EEL to provide technical assistance and training on water conservation and water pollution prevention, as well as to do citizen monitoring that supports the TMDL implementation. We have progress to report, but we haven't got our contract open. We are mission-driven, I guess you might say faith-based. We have faith that will be paid someday. But really, our organization is still very much ready to open a contract. There's an issue of sole source. We did change contractors from the Trees Foundation to the Institute for Fisheries Resources. We qualified through the NCB process, and now we are told that we cannot compete. If this problem can't be resolved, we'd like to know so that we could have the contract put on the street so we can compete for it. We want to do the work, and we prefer actually to move expeditiously into performing. And the timing on that is really good. Just briefly, in the unusual handout I gave you, it's a Forest and Trees newsletter. And at each place that I've placed part of the information I'm purveying to you, there's a relevant program from the recovery project, so you could read more. But we We're able to measure water temperature and flow at least 80 different locations in the eel in cooperation with the University of California. Extraordinarily dry year. Very, very important to get data. And we did so at substantial cost of, no compensation. But that's the level of commitment that our people have and our capacity. That said, no analysis, very little mapping, very little value added that we can share back with the community. So as we get our contract, there's a synergy with the work we performed. We also did cyanobacteria studies at 15 locations. Cyanotoxins in the eel can kill your dog, and no one has had the capacity to monitor. And so the University of California has approached us. We're using spat samplers from UC Santa Cruz, and we're detecting that cyanobacteria problems are not universal in the eel. They seem to be concentrated in one geographic area. And so this is very, very useful both in terms of our temperature, flow, and the other aspects of cyanobacteria to kind of look at the picture as a whole. Fall Chinook salmon, over 10,000, spread throughout the basin, had plenty of water to ride. Last year's year class appears strong despite the drought, so optimal flows with fish spawning lower in the river, good survival. There's still a specter that we could see 100,000 Chinook salmon in the Eel River with honest recovery efforts in the 21st century. And the maintaining populations of 10,000 or greater for 5 or 6 years in a row hasn't happened since the 50s. Where else is that going on in California? So there's a very large recovery of a lot of the Eel River watershed, but other areas are not in recovery and may actually be trending in the opposite direction. We took Board Member Dudek's request to heart and worked with your staff last March with Mark Magtoto, and the third handout in your little packet there is evaluation. How would we measure? Since we're going to go out and talk to people, I mean, that feels good, but what are they going to do? And so we thought those were good questions that Tim put forward, and we have the evaluation forms to let you know how we did over the course of the year. And we did a lot of outreach. We're constantly engaging people. We drew 200 people to Water Day at the Mateel last April, and we taught aquatic monitoring, water conservation, pollution prevention, erosion control, forest health. The eel is mostly 40 to 60-year-old trees. If we thin from below, we could triple the water supply. Old growth used to produce 10 times as much water. Can't go home again. But forest health is very much part of our ethos, and the fire is a corollary problem that if you fight fire by thinning from below, then you'll also increase water yield. Round Valley Salmon Awareness Festival, October 17th and 18th. 150 people came to salmon dinner, went to traditional dances. We went into the grammar school, and we sparked such enthusiasm. We got a follow-up grant, and we're going to go out and teach and train the teachers how to take their kids to the river and how to monitor. In the Van Dusen River, I forgot to put more Kids in the Woods on here, but the $12,000 for equipment that you guys recommended did go through. The kids are monitoring water temperature in the Van Dusen. 500 kids went to the river. They learned how to do science. They learned about poetry. They did video. And so we did Is It Swimmable? We did algae workshops. And we did a lot of press and media. So it's all on our website, eelriverrecovery.org. And we really look forward to getting our contract open because the demand for the services really is substantial. And with the enforcement efforts in the eel right now, there's a lot of people that aren't very relaxed. But I think that Chris Kerrigan is doing an excellent job in that he's very explicit about what people need to do to avoid problems. And so we think that will stimulate the demand for technical assistance so people can get out in front of problems and not face a cease and abatement, cleanup and abatement, cease and desist, that kind of thing. And so Chris was saying, gee, if you clean up before we come see you, then it'll be kind of a fun visit. But he said, if you don't want to see us, we'll get a search warrant. But we won't fine you unless you refuse to clean up and abate. So I thought the tone he set was really, really good. I look forward to us setting a model in the eel for people that actually live more in sync and share the resources both with each other and with the fish. And it's quite variable. There's a lot of places out there where there's a different culture than in the places where the creek is drying up. It's over-appropriated certainly in some of the eel, but in other areas people are sharing and they are still maintaining fish in severe drought years. And so, and the eel is a patchwork quilt. You see pictures of the problems, the lower main stems develop cyanotoxins, but there's huge amounts of the eel that are in recovery. And so, don't
There are
forget the eel.
opportunities there.
Don't forget the eel. We'll come back and report more fully.
Remember the eel will be the phrase of the day.
Excuse me?
Remember the eel will be the phrase of the day.
There we go.
In your honor.
There we go. And it's not just the fish, but there's a lot of those too.
Thank you, Mr. Higgins. I've talked to Mr. Polimas, and we're just going to do a focus meeting with the lawyers to just figure this out. If we can. If we can't,
I will
we'll
show
go
up
back
here.
out
I will
as
bring
quickly as
my
we can.
contractors, anything we need to do to work with your staff. We have shown complete willingness, and we maintain that demeanor. So,
Appreciate that.
thank you. And the North Coast Regional Board is very excited about getting this project open. So,
Thank you very much, and thanks for the great work.
And thank you for the extra work on the evaluation process.
You made her heart sing today. Great. Minutes from the January 6th board meeting. Do I hear a motion?
I move adoption.
Wait for Fran. How many of us were there?
Yeah, I need to abstain.
Oh, we can't do that till Fran gets here. Okay.
Can't the chair second?
I mean, technically, the board could go forward and it could pass on a 2-0-2-1, but it's fine to wait until Fran's here as well.
Well, or let's just do it so that we don't have to come back to it, if that's all right.
Okay.
So, motion?
Yes, I move. So moved.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All abstaining?
Aye.
There we go. Okay. I don't think it's not a high issue of controversy. I'm not going to worry about it. Next, we have a number of uncontested items on the agenda, which we can take all at once if there are no speaker cards. All right. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And thank you for that all the work. We appreciate it.
Which is great. Do you guys want to say something for 5 minutes? It's great work. Since you came all the way up here. You don't have to. You can just, take the money and run, really, pretty much.
Yoram Cohen, UCLA, and Chair Marcus, we want to thank you for giving us the opportunity here to work with our many disadvantaged communities in California, particularly in the various parts of the valley, and to help them overcome the problem of inadequate water supply. And that's what this project will do, to set an example that hopefully will bring others into this entire approach to finally solve the problem of contaminated water, particularly with respect to nitrates. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Looking forward to your results in this and learning a lot. We all have a huge challenge in front of us, and it feels good to be moving on, trying out the things that need to be tried out to see if they can have wider success. But there's no issue more important, so thank you. All right. Mr. Howard, could you please introduce item 5?
Thank you. Item 5 is a update on the CV Salt's annual progress report. The board several years ago gave quite a bit of money out of the cleanup and abatement account for the CV Salt's project, and at that time they asked for annual progress reports. My understanding is Jeannie Chilcott will be doing the presentation. Will introduce her co-workers.
Nice to see you, not as a disembodied voice. Good to see you in 3 dimensions rather than as a disembodied voice over a
conference call line.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. We'll see how this all works. All right. Good morning, Chair Marcus, members of the board. My name's Jean Chilcott. I'm an environmental program manager with the Central Valley Regional Water Quality Control Board. in the Rancho Cordova office. I'm here today with my colleagues from CV Salts to provide the annual report. Now, the presentation outline, I will very briefly go over the background and some of the reporting requirements from the cleanup and abatement account resolution that provided seed money to the project. And then we will really want to focus most of our discussion today on our implementation strategy and where we are moving forward. David Corey, who is the chair of the Central Valley Selenium Coalition, will be addressing the nitrate and drinking water issues, where we're going with our implementation strategy for that. We have Richard Meyerhoff, who's the technical project director from CDM Smith, who will be talking about sustainable salt management, and then Debbie Webster will finish up with the concept of moving forward. What are we going to be focused on in 2015, and where's this project going? Again, CV Salts, Central Valley Salinity Alternatives for Long-Term Sustainability, is a collaborative basin planning effort. We are utilizing a stakeholder process to develop the salinity and nitrate management plan. This isn't being done in a vacuum. We have quite a few different stakeholders participating, both from the discharger community, as you can see here. We also have people from other state and federal agencies that participate, including staff from the state board, Darren Polhemus, Diane Barkley. So we're trying to stay coordinated with all the different agencies that could implement corrections and also participate and help us find the best solutions. You've seen this slide before. The main thing that I want you to remember about salt and the Central Valley is while we have problems in the Central Valley, what happens in the Central Valley also affects the rest of California. Salt moves with the water. So for water moving out of the San Joaquin and Sacramento River basins into the Delta, it's transported to other parts of the state. We have economic costs that have been directly calculated from the salt accumulation of $1.5 billion within the Central Valley, and that's by 2030, and also a statewide annual income impact of $3 billion per year. These are diverse sources. They are impacting the entire state.
This is the cost now? Or
This
the cost
would be
in the
the
future?
cost. Excuse me, it was an estimated cost calculated by UC Davis for 2030 if
2030.
management did not change.
Okay, this is our, okay.
So this is our baseline. If we continue as we are, by 2030,
Right,
we're
business
looking
as
at
usual,
$3
okay,
billion
right.
per year. We also have nitrate issues. And what's unique about this is that these are legacy conditions. They're not isolated to a single spot. This is some work that's been done by our technical groups where they've identified areas where in 5 square mile radiuses, those are concentrations in wells that exceed the nitrate objective of 10 milligrams per liter nitrate as nitrate as nitrogen. And again, there's economic cost, treatment, alternative supplies, and there's diverse sources that are contributing to this. But again, these are legacy issues. Right now, our regulation is set up to prevent contamination. We're dealing with a problem that's existing and trying to figure out a way of correcting what's already there. So our goals are safe drinking water in areas with nitrate-impacted groundwater, and environmental and economic sustainability both in those areas and those areas impacted by salt. These are the driving factors of everything that we're doing with our initiative. Now, the state board was very helpful. They provided seed money. Back in 2009, they started with $1.2 million of cleanup and abatement funding, and then in 2010 added another $3.8. For the second allocation, the $3.8 million, there were some requirements, which is why we're here today, part of why we're here today. We needed to explain to you the expenditures to date, services provided, what the stakeholders were contributing, the accomplishments, and the timelines to complete the work, to make sure that this wasn't just a reiterative process and we weren't just talking. We were actually going to come up with a plan and implement it. Now, most of this information is provided in the written report that comes as part of this annual update, so I will just hit some of the highlights so that we can focus on the implementation strategy and where we're going. Again, stakeholder process. This is the Central Valley Salinity Coalition membership roster. We found out today that it's actually short a member or two, We do have most of, if not all, of the agricultural coalitions within the Central Valley participating and most of the discharge group. This is the group that is a nonprofit that the state board and the regional board entered into a memorandum of agreement with in order to maintain the fact that this is a stakeholder-driven effort, and it's the stakeholders' responsibility to manage and move it forward. And this is the group that's working on it. The expenditures for services and stakeholder contributions, this is a summary of what's in your written report. From the resolution side, we've spent to date roughly $3 million. The Salinity Coalition has ponied up about 50%, again, on that, just in direct cash contributions to provide cost shares for some of the efforts that have been funded from the cleanup and abatement account. But there are additional stakeholder contributions for many of current implementation activities. They're not waiting until the plan is done to begin taking on some activities to address salt and nitrate now. And we're using those pilot studies as we develop our implementation strategies. So there's work that's being directly done from cleanup and abatement funds. There's work that's being matched directly dollar for dollar, and then there are actual additional activities that we're building our foundation on that the stakeholders are implementing. Oops. So what have we finished? We've compiled the data and we've done the modeling. So we have a source and fate model that we're basing many of our implementation alternatives on and our various strategies. We're working on beneficial use studies in the Tulare Lake Basin and in the Sacramento River Basin, which we'll discuss a little bit more. We've really taken a hard look at the water quality objectives and done a number of white papers and research studies on the effects of salinity and nitrate on aquatic livestock watering, irrigated ag, and municipal supply. We wanted to make sure what was the most limiting beneficial use, and that as we move forward with the plan, we were appropriately protecting uses. And we have additional work going on in the lower San Joaquin and our implementation component, which you will hear more about. In progress now with the cleanup and abatement funds, and again, these are co-funded projects. There are match dollars being provided by the stakeholders. We have administrative, technical, and facilitation support. Any big stakeholder group needs someone to help keep it moving forward and keep it from tangling up on itself. We also are continuing our work on the data management side, the conceptual model, fine-tuning all of those components to make sure we really understand as best as we can how the groundwater is moving in areas, the trends in contamination, and what might be effective solutions for those. The S-Salts Phase 3 project you will hear more about is really where we're focused on what do we do with this salt. Do we contain it? Do we move it? Do we treat it? What is the most economical and best solution for sustainability? To do all this work, rather than approach the Central Valley as a whole, we are working on a series of case studies to ground truth our options and to build our policies off of. The municipal evaluation in surface water is occurring in agricultural facilities. One of the limiting factors with recirculating and conserving water in an agricultural environment is within our basin, all of our surface waters have the municipal and domestic supply designated beneficial use, which carries along with it a limitation for salinity levels. And the more that agriculture tries to recycle and conserve, the higher the levels are going, and it's becoming extremely difficult to maximize the use of the resource without potentially impeding a use that doesn't exist. So we have a case study for that. We are looking at municipal and agricultural supply in a select area of groundwater in the Tulare Lake Basin. That in particular is being done to evaluate, again, appropriate use and appropriate protection in an area that may become a salt management zone, someplace to contain salt. But again, we're moving very cautiously, making sure we have this case study completed so we have a solid basis to provide our policy recommendations. The lower San Joaquin River, we're looking at both water quality objectives and implementation and the potential for using that river as a salt conduit if we can meet water quality objectives. Can we move salt out of the basin while still meeting objectives when we have high flows? Not that we've seen very many this year or last year, but when we do have those flows.
It's good to dream.
Yes, we can dream. And this relates to the comment you received about the delta, because the San Joaquin River drains into the delta, and we obviously need to keep those objectives in mind with anything we're doing in the upstream area. So it is all linked together. And then we have the early implementation for safe drinking water. Again, a case study where we're looking at the nitrate contamination in a specific area in the Alta Irrigation District. And we're evaluating what is the current contamination, what are the trends, what are the various practices that can be done. And you'll be hearing a little bit more about this later. So if you look at it cumulatively, you can see that we're spending quite a bit of money. We will be close to $20 million just in the planning stage to get the basin plan in place. By 2014, we had run through approximately half of the cleanup and abatement funds available to us. There's a reason we haven't run through all of it. We are saving a large chunk of that to do the environmental and economic review of what's proposed. So as you can see from this chart, the green section, we are really relying on the stakeholders to provide the bulk of the resources and provide that foundation so that as we're moving forward with the amendment, we have a solid product that's based on reality. The timeline, we received an extension last year that we could develop the final salt and nitrate management plan and submit it to our board for review in May of 2016. It's going to be tight. There's no doubt about that. We have a lot of discussions to do. We are still working on several of the technical study, which look like they will be completed just in early 2016. We will be doing some of our environmental and economic analysis as those projects are ongoing. So again, it will be very, very tight, but we are committed to meeting that deadline and moving forward. So for 2015, the real focus is going to be on the implementation, the modeling of the nitrate work that is in phase 2 of the conceptual model. That's the study in Alta Irrigation District, trying to evaluate alternatives for providing safe drinking water in an area that has legacy contamination. Phase 3 of the conceptual model is actually drafting the report. Then we will be completing our beneficial use studies, those case studies for municipal evaluation in surface waters in the agricultural areas in the Sacramento and also in the groundwater in the Tulare Lake Basin, and continuing with our implementation planning down near the bottom. And then, of course, the lower San Joaquin River is a very large basin case study trying to see how all of these pieces fit together. So now I would like to transfer it over to David and to Richard to really focus on the implementation strategy.
Oh, good. Before you move on, can I ask a quick
Sure.
question? And it's sort of in the bin of unintended consequences and that sort of thing. But you mentioned the aquatic life study, and also I'm interested in if you've had a chance to connect with the freshwater arm of the nutrient numeric endpoint work that we're funding through SWRCB, and just to make sure we're moving in the same direction, because
We're connected with
Yep.
the work, but we're not duplicating that work.
Yeah.
So we're watching it very closely, but for us right now, we are really looking at nitrate, and our first priority is the safe drinking water, but
Sure.
we haven't lost sight of the other work.
right, and that's where, and I completely respect and understand that prioritization. But we heard earlier today an example of the cyanotoxin issue, which is a national issue, but it's acute in certain areas of our state, and it relates to nitrate. So I just wanted to highlight that point and emphasize that while safe drinking water has the nitrate component, it also has an algal bloom component, and swimmability of waters has that component, which ties back to nitrate management. So I just wanted to highlight that, and hope that
Thank you.
you're keeping that in mind as you move forward with aquatic life endpoints. Thank you.
So I guess I'm up. Hold on, let me see if I can figure out how this thing works. Again, I encourage interruptions if you have questions in the middle.
Good, thank you for that
Actually,
invitation.
makes the flow go better because I don't really have anything planned to say. But as Jeannie pointed out, we have this map on the screen there shows us the nitrate issues in groundwater in the Central Valley. We've dealt with it extensively over the last several years in CV salts and in other arenas as well, focused on it quite a bit recently. And what we're trying to understand is how we deal with this legacy issue. How are we going to deal with these high elevated groundwater, nitrates in groundwater? And we realize that the current tools that the regional board has available to them really don't provide the use protection soon enough for the communities who are being impacted by this. It also, the current regulations tie the regional board's hands to in many cases, prohibit the discharge and actually prohibit agricultural farming on that ground above there, the way the regulations are set up. So what we're trying to do is come up with a process in which we can provide actual use protection quicker in a more efficient way and allows farming to continue. Help me. There we go. Some of the difficulties.
Sorry, if we're looking away from you, it's just we're seeing the PowerPoint, but it keeps flickering.
Oh.
It's jarring.
Just stop blinking. Is it still doing it?
I'm going to listen to you, and I'm going to periodically.
Okay. So some of the difficulties that we have to give the regional board the authority to address these issues in a more efficient and more effective way are some prior state board orders. And these are three of them that that set the regulations up and in some ways tie the hands for the regional board in how to address this issue. The first order is the Rancho Caballero order, which basically says that waste discharge requirements must implement the basin plan. So if a certain action or activity isn't in the basin plan, the regional board can't put that into a WDR. So we need to make sure that the basin plan is consistent with however we want to move forward. That's one of the main reasons why our site and nitrate management plan is looking at implementing a basin plan amendment as well so that we can expand that toolbox for the regional board. The city of Lompoc basically says that when water quality is better, let me make sure I got this right, is better than the water quality objective, you need to implement anti-degradation policies, so best practical treatment and control and in the best interest of the people of the state of California. So you need to go through the anti-deg analysis. If the water quality is worse than the objective, then you either have to make the discharge meet the objective or you have to prohibit that discharge. And when it comes to agricultural discharges, in some instances, we basically can't meet that number as we apply it right now at the first encounter groundwater. We can't meet that 10. So it sets up this system in which the regional board may have to prohibit farming on the ground in order to comply with this order. The San Diego milk producers basically says, move over, I think we have a whole slide on that, that if the water exceeds the limits, then you have to apply, if the water exceeds, groundwater exceeds the water quality objectives, we have to, the discharge, and we have to basically meet the objective at the point of discharge. If you can't prove that you're meeting that objective, the board would have to prohibit that discharge. So all of these processes set up in which the regional board has very little flexibility in addressing the nitrate issue. So therein lies why we're looking at an alternative compliance strategy. This strategy, one of the things that isn't allowed under the prior orders is one of the actions that Thomas Harder recommended in his report, which is a pump and fertilize strategy. In that process, you basically pump the groundwater with high nitrates, you apply it to your ground, you fertilize crops with it, that will use up some of the nitrates, and eventually you can help remediate the groundwater issue. Under the prior orders, that's not allowed because if your groundwater is above the objective, once you pump that water up, it's above the objective. If you apply it to the ground, it depercolates, anything goes past the root zone into the first encounter groundwater, that won't meet the objective, so the regional board has to prohibit that. We need to have a system that allows those types of projects to work. So again, we need to, hold on for a moment here. In setting up an alternative compliance strategy, we need to prioritize our efforts. First off, we need to make sure that we provide safe drinking water to the constituents as soon as possible. We need to reduce those impacts, which ensure that we implement best practical treatment control and best efforts, those sorts of things, which are in our WDRs for irrigated agriculture. And we also have to work toward managed restoration. An important part of this alternative compliance strategy is it's really only providing an additional tool to the regional board. It gives them the option to implement this new alternative compliance package, but it doesn't require them to use it. They can still use their existing authorities. So when you implement these different compliance strategies, those projects are going to have to come before the board and be looked at and approved by the regional board and by the state board. So it's not pre-approving any of this. It's just giving an additional toolbox for the board. Some of the benefits of the alternative compliance strategy, again, it addresses the drinking water issue sooner, and it also will become an enforceable. Yes, please.
They would be quiet, but you never know. I apologize if it's in the materials and I missed it. Since you've been focusing on this, and obviously drinking water is the issue of our time and the thing that's most important to us, I appreciate that you're focusing on that as well as how to keep agriculture flourishing and all that. I'm very pleased that you're doing the thinking about how to try and work within the framework of the laws we have, but how to move forward on actual results in general. When you were looking at that, did you have you done an assessment of the percentage of water used in the Central Valley that actually is drinking water and domestic use? Does anybody have that stat somewhere? We must have it somewhere. Anyone?
I don't know if I do. Richard, do you? I don't think so. So you're trying.
The drinking water program must have it then. No, I was just wondering if you looked at that, because part of the issue is that our challenge is the human receptors, right? Human people who are drinking this, and the actual amount of water needed to treat compared to the overall water use in the valley. It just seems smart to focus on getting it cleaned up. I'm actually liking what you're doing, but I was hoping you knew the number.
Right. Well, I'm not sure I'm quite following what you're getting at, but yeah, the actual what we're looking at is providing actual use protection and
right.
treating that water that is actually being consumed.
Right.
That gets, what did you call it? The human receptor?
No, poor choice of words. I was going sciencey on you, which is weird for me.
But yeah, we're looking at actual use protection. So some of the projects, the pilot projects or early implementations projects that we're looking at are providing alternative water supplies to those cities. So you provide surface water supplies and get them off of the contaminated groundwater. Some other concepts of what we're looking at doing is providing point of use, point of entry treatment of the groundwater, so that those folks who are drinking the water actually have clean, usable drinking water. And we can do that at a much more effective, much more cost effectively than cleaning up the entire aquifer. I mean, it's when you look
right.
back
That's
at
what I
that
was
slide,
getting
you
at.
just
It's more
basically can't
cost-effective
do
and
that.
common sense.
And
faster.
Yeah, so that's what we're looking at, and trying to do that in a way that the regional board has the authority to allow those projects to take place, and also looking to allow those growers who would be funding those projects or those discharges that would fund it to continue to operate, so that you have that that economic engine to continue to pay for the costs associated with the ongoing treatment and substitute water supply. So that's basically the broad.
Well, you're going for a win-win
bargain that we're discussing.
Okay.
And you need to keep in mind that we're really talking about the big picture right now. there's a lot of uncertainty on everybody's part as to how this plays out, what it means from agricultural standpoint, from the wastewater treatment plants, from the disadvantaged communities as well. There's a lot of uncertainty, and we think we have a general idea of where we might need to go, but we need to work through those details. And I think once we get into the details, we'll have a better understanding of what it means and maybe get a little bit more comfort with where we're headed.
And it seems to me that you're embarking on a concept that many of us are working with now and have been recently on matching water quality to use. And this is it's a big conversation, but it's one that I'm glad you're working on it, because you've got a good group.
That's good. I hadn't drawn, of course, I hadn't drawn that connection the way parts of Australia call it the right water approach, the right water for the right use, so that you're not, it wouldn't make sense to have to treat the whole aquifer to drinking water levels if the harm is drinking water and agriculture can use it as a nutrient. So.
Right. And the unfortunate thing is, under the current basin plan and the current state board policies, that type of use would still be prohibited. You couldn't pump, water that's at 15 and apply it to your crops, because if it percolates past your root zone, it's going to be above 10 when it gets there. So that sort of pump and fertilize, again, is prohibited under the current rules. So we need to set up a structure that allows that to take place in the basin plan and gives those tools to the regional board so that they can utilize them when it's appropriate.
These are themes that are kind of coming through a lot of our activities these days. I would like to point out the funding we approved earlier this morning relates to experiments with applying a point of use strategy, and so we're very supportive of learning more about what's possible in the right use kind of framework. Another parallel, though, is as we see the alternative compliance strategies emerging in many of our programs, and I want to be encouraging of this, but that comes with an accountability side. You've pointed out a key point, which is to meet concentration-based standards in the nitrate challenge, we would hit a wall from a regulatory standpoint if we don't allow some flexibility related to the mass balance strategy. So looking at it as a mass approach to nitrate as opposed to a concentration approach. So I think you're helping us kind of move toward that. I would point out another parallel effort that we've been embarking on that our agricultural panel was trying to tackle, in terms of looking at the benefits of managing nitrogen in a mass balance way. And if you have any comments or you can think about moving forward about some of the recommendations of the agricultural panel, and if they'll be useful in terms of demonstrating that and having a metric, a performance standard that you can use in lieu of concentration standards, in terms of mass of nitrogen removed via good practices and targeted irrigation practices.
Right. Well, the Irrigated Lands program certainly spending, and I spend a lot of time in that program as well, we're spending a lot of time trying to understand how we can implement practices to address current and future impacts to groundwater. So we have the groundwater assessment reports. Matter of fact, I think we have a slide. The next one here, we'll move forward.
I think it just, my point is only that there's a burden on all of us if we choose an alternative compliance strategy to show the performance standard that we'll be meeting.
Right. Well, there's certainly, we're working on that in terms of meeting those objectives, those targets in the Irrigated Lands program. So we're looking at groundwater assessments, looking at the proper way to farm to try and minimize that discharge up to the root zone. And it's a difficult problem to overcome, because groundwater, it's difficult to know exactly what's going on there. There's a lot of interplay between the surface of the ground and the water body itself, what takes place in the root zone. So it's quite complicated, and we're going to spend a lot of time and effort to better understand that interplay and how we can farm in the most environmentally conscious way to deal with the groundwater issue and help remediate that and help prevent future degradation of groundwater. Speaking of WDRs, some of the benefits of the alternative compliance strategy, we need, we have more tools in the toolbox, but keep in mind the regional board is going to approve all of these. They'll have those tools in the toolbox. When they actually implement that, they're going to come up with a strategy that makes sense for that particular situation, and they're going to put those provisions into enforceable provisions in WDRs. So it won't be, so that you'll have assurances that the activities will take place by the dischargers that will improve the use protection, that will protect the use protection. Prohibiting the discharge altogether really doesn't provide any benefits to the valley. It cuts off that economic engine. It doesn't fix the legacy issues that we have in the groundwater, and it doesn't actually provide drinking water to the folks who need it. And it also allows for longer-term compliance strategies, so we can look and understand how the dynamics of farming and application of nitrogen, how that can be done to avoid those impacts to groundwater. So I think we talked about some of this already, looking at the offset program and allowing, allowing some discharges if you provide this actual use protection. And these are some of the ideas that you could come up with. Wellhead treatment, point of use, surface water supplies, all of that will provide better water quality much faster than the traditional approach of regulations. Some of this, in terms of similar capacity, if you do find a similar capacity in the water body, we still have anti-degradation issues that we have to comply with. So you need to show best practical treatment control, and you have to show maximum benefit to the people of the state of California, and you can't unreasonably impact beneficial uses. So all those protections will still apply, and the regional board will judiciously apply those, and if they don't, you guys are here to make sure that to correct that. But I have assured that Carl's out there. They take their job very seriously, as you know, and all of this will, they look at anti-degradation.
Well, it's the whole trust but verify
Exactly.
package
Yeah.
of.
Yeah. So it'll be verified, and you have the WDRs and requirements in those to be able to enforce those provisions.
We may have talked about this in an earlier meeting, but what you're envisioning, because this would be, if folks wanted to do the voluntary compliance route, it's going to be self-selected parcels of people, packets, I don't know.
I don't see anything
So
really voluntary about any of
big
this. So
WDR or small?
What's that?
I mean, how many do you envision? You're guessing, I know, you can't say. I mean, do you
I
think
don't know. We have to work through those details, but I think it could be, it could vary depending upon the
Right.
circumstances that are there.
Right.
Some of the early projects with Alta Irrigation is providing, surface water supplies. That's a fairly large area, I believe, and dealing with multiple disadvantaged communities, I think, provide benefits to that. You might be able to help me if there's more to that, but I don't know how big or small it will be. It will probably depend upon where you are and the specifics of the deal. And you're going to have to bring those specifics to the regional board and convince them that this is a good deal for the deal for the state and makes sense.
Well, my sense also is, depending on how this is structured and messaged, there's a core group that's working on this, and I try and go to most of the meetings, and I mean, they're really down in the weeds. It's pretty detailed stuff. And oftentimes I struggle with it and think, even though I like this approach, and it's taken me a long time, we've talked about it, that, it takes several briefings before it kind of clicks in about, oh, okay, I think I understand where you're headed here. Assuming that there's this collaborative process, produces a product, then it's going to have to be taken out to the communities and sold.
Yeah, right.
And I think the key is on the issue of certainty. So these are all very good ideas, but there's no get-out-of-jail-free card. You still have to comply. You have to be accountable. You're going to have to meet anti-deg. So taking it out to the regulated community will still be a sell. But I think what'll get them there is this notion of certainty. And then and of course, the communities that need the safe drinking water, they need to feel that there is certainty on all those other components, on accountability, et cetera. Once you get there, I could see this really taking off because it will spur partnerships. It will spur funding that can't be tapped into right now because of this sort of quagmire that we're in. So again, they're looking at some pilots, but assuming all those things, good messaging and the ability to really demonstrate certainty, I could see this taking off.
So we'll have, so like, that's a really good way to frame it. So it's like we'll have early adopters, other people will also see it's possible, and then it could take off. That's the theory.
Right. But there'd be certainty on both sides too. So
Yeah,
certainty that we have the
goes
use
both ways.
protection and some regulatory certainty on the other side. And
Can you just speak a moment? It's obvious to those of us here, but I'm always thinking about the people who are listening over the web and people who aren't in these conversations all the time. When you say surface water substitution, that means folks who have surface water off the projects or a water body, giving that to folks who right now are pumping groundwater that's nitrate contaminated.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. That's one of the types of projects that could be utilized. But as well, you could actually treat groundwater at the point of use or point of entry, those sorts of things. Yeah. The timeline, again, this is the timeline for sort of the regulatory changes. This isn't a timeline for moving forward and making progress on either actual use protections or on addressing discharges of nitrates to groundwater. This is sort of the regulatory world. So we're looking at setting the outline of these broad policy issues right now. And again, there's a lot of uncertainty on everybody's side as to what this means. My constituency, the ag folks, the farmers, you know, they don't really quite understand what this means, and we need to work through that. I know there's uncertainty on the environmental justice side for the disadvantaged communities as to what this means, and we need to work through all of that in this next year so that we understand what the bounds of this program are going to be, or what the bounds of this plan are going to be. So once we complete the silent nitrate management plan, certain components will likely need a basin plan amendment, and then we'll need to go through that basin plan amendment process in 2017, revise after that's been adopted, revise WDRs to include the alternative compliance strategies that have been sort of negotiated and agreed to by the regional board and gone through their own individual processes. So there's going to be a whole lot of board approval as these things move through, and begin implementation in 2019 in terms of the actual projects. But in the interim, we have these, I think, Steve, you sort of, this is the slide I was looking for when you asked the question. We have actions that are already addressing nitrates in existing WDRs. So we have a groundwater assessment reports that are going out trying to look at what is the state of the groundwater throughout the Central Valley in a more detailed way, more detailed than other reports have done. We have growers fill out farm evaluation reports so that they understand how they're farming. We can document that and make them ensure that they've thought about it and thought through how their farming practices might impact both surface and groundwater quality. We've just come up with a template for the nitrogen management plans in which growers this spring will be filling out a nitrogen management plan that looks at what their applied nitrogen is, what the expected use of that crop is, and try and look at that nitrogen balance so that we can, each grower, we're assured that they're looking at that and understanding what is the potential to discharge to groundwater and how that works together. We also have more detailed studies which are looking at the management practice effectiveness program. So we're looking at how are these different management practices effective at protecting groundwater. So there's a lot of very detailed studies to understand the dynamics and make sure that we can get growers to implement management practices that are protective. And the grower outreach is to educate those growers so that they implement those. And those are all in enforceable provisions of the WDR, so they're required to do that. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you very much.
It sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. I don't know if you have to point a certain way.
All right. Thank you, David. So,
Turn on your.
oh, yes.
Turn it on and pull it closer.
Thank you.
Can you hear that now? Okay. All right, this portion of the presentation, we're going to talk about, switch gears from nitrate and talk about salt. It's a salt and nitrate management plan. And in parallel with the discussions on nitrate, there's a lot of work been going on salinity and how we're going to deal with that in the future as well. So we have a few slides here to kind of highlight some of the work that's been completed to date and to talk briefly where we're going next. This particular slide kind of summarizes the study that's been ongoing for the last couple of years. It's called SSALTS, and SSALT stands for Strategic Salt Accumulation Land and Transportation Study. SSALTS is a lot simpler to remember. And the focus of this is to identify sustainable salt management alternatives for inclusion ultimately in the salt and nitrate management plan. So we want to identify what are our options and what would be included then for moving forward into the future. To do this, we're looking at some key questions. First being, what is the magnitude of the problem? And then once we have that information, that gives us a good sense of basically doing the math of what it would necessary then to achieve sustainability into the future once we know what we have to work with. And we, of course, through the conceptual model work that's been done over the last couple of years with CV salts, where we have a lot of baseline information that we can pull from to develop these numbers. We take this information then through these studies and with the goal then of looking at what kind of tools do we have now to work with, what does that accomplish in terms of sustainability, and then look at the gap. What are we missing? And is it significant or minor? That, of course, may depend on where you are in the Central Valley. And again, as I said, ultimately leading to preparing the salinity section for the salt and nitrate management plan.
Oh,
we won't go through every single one of these. There's a report.
That's just good.
It's called the Phase 2 SSALT report that talks about various alternatives that have been looked at.
Can you just take a minute again? I'm thinking it's such an interesting arena, but unless you're in it, people don't even realize it's an issue. Can you just give 2 sentences on what the salt issue is?
Certainly. Use of water, whether it's for agriculture, drinking, anything you do with water, over time causes salt to be accumulated. So every use of salt increases the concentration of salts, whether it's in the surface water, groundwater, or the like. And over time, this is a significant problem, not just in California. It's a significant problem anywhere in the country.
In the world, it's a huge issue.
It's a huge issue. So one of the challenges, particularly in areas that are relatively closed, in the sense that we don't have good water movement, this concentration process may be occurring actually more quickly, and in time will make the water unusable for certain uses, particularly in this case agriculture, which is very sensitive to salt. Okay. Sure. I feel like I'm eating it already.
No, it's really hard. That's why they have to clip this to me, because I
Yeah.
just can't do it.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, you made that point. I mean, the Central Valley being a relatively closed system with respect to water flow, you know, the queue that leaves through the Golden Gate, that's a big part of it. Do you see then that we have a bigger challenge than some other places in the country, such as the Ohio River or the Mississippi, just because of this flow-through characteristic?
I would say west versus east, certainly more significant, but I can tell you in places like Arizona, significant problems. And again, it's because the water doesn't pass through. It's mostly captured and keeps getting recirculated within the same system. But you're right, back east where there's a lot of flow-through, a lot more rainfall, the process is much slower. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, this list here on the left side of the figure talks about treatment salt recovery technologies. There's a number of mature technologies that have been around for many years for managing salt. But there's a lot of emerging technologies, and this is a lot of work being done by universities, some in California. It's being done by research institutes. It's being done all over the world where people are coming up with creative ways to treat salt. On the right side, we're talking more about